Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, as always, my friend, great to talk to you.
Well, thanks for having me on. And just so your listeners know, I am not a Bond villain, okay?
Yeah, but, you could be. If only you were a trillionaire, you could kind of, and get yourself a cat. You could move
Right.
it. You could move in that direction. Hey, I wanted to talk to you today, Hans, because I got to tell you, a lot of the decisions I've been seeing coming out of the Supreme Court. You recall, I'm an attorney. I cover constitutional law issues here
Right.
on the St. Louis radio stations, and I've been pretty pleased with most of them. This one, I am not pleased. Watson versus RNC, and give us kind of an overview as to what the Supreme Court said, and then I want to dive into why I think that this was a mistake.
Mississippi, like a lot of states, unfortunately these days, doesn't require absentee or mail-in ballots to be in by the end of Election Day. Smart states like Florida require that. That used to be the rule everywhere. Mississippi, the ballots can come in for 5 days after Election Day, and they'll still be counted. In Illinois, it's 2 weeks. California, 7 days. Anyway, the RNC, Republican National Committee, sued, saying that violates federal law. And what they were talking about was the 3 federal statutes that set Election Day as the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals actually agreed with that, and that's what was before the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, as you well know, split decision 5-4 in a weird lineup. Amy Coney Barrett writes the opinion. She's joined by Chief Justice Roberts and the 3 liberal justices, and she says, oh, no, that's not a problem. As long as the ballot is postmarked by Election Day, it can come in any time. That Election Day statute only applies to the casting of the vote. It doesn't apply to the receipt of the vote by election officials. Of course, the problem with that is, as the great dissent by Alito pointed out, is that you can cast all the ballots you want. They're totally ineffective until and unless they're received by election officials.
Exactly. And when I read that decision this morning, I had to briefly read it because, frankly, I was still working at my law firm this morning, getting ready for the show at the same time, Hans. But as I was briefly reading it, here's what struck me, and I want to get your take on it. What struck me is that under our federalism system, where the federal government establishes the election day, but the states also have a say in how the elections are carried out. Under that system, though, the federal government says this is the election day. And when we have every state can make their own rules about when the ballots have to come in, when they're counted, how long they have, doesn't that undercut what the federal government has already stated with regard to having the election on a specific day?
Oh, no, you're exactly right. And in fact, that was the whole purpose of those 3 statutes. Now, if people are wondering why there's 3 laws, well, one sets the time for Senate elections, one for the House, and one for the presidency. But the whole reason those statutes are in place, first one was passed in 1845. Before that, there was no such law, and all these states held their federal elections on different dates. And the whole point of saying, no, you have to have election day on that Tuesday in November was because when one state held an election in September and the other one in November, it caused all kinds of chaos and confusion across the country because nobody knew, well, when's the election going to be final? Who now has control of the House or the U.S. Senate? That was the whole reason those statutes were put in, and this severely undercuts that.
It does. We're talking to Hans von Spakovsky with Advancing American Freedom. And Hans, the other thing that struck me is this. As I'm reading this, I noticed that Amy Coney Barrett went to great lengths to make this distinction between casting the ballot and receiving the ballot. You've already discussed that briefly, but legally, whenever you interpret a statute, and Amy goes into great detail about saying that, well, the statute is silent on that distinction, so we're going to allow the states to fill it in. But under statutory construction, you have to apply the statute as written unless they specifically provide other instructions in the statute. Here, Congress was silent on that distinction, so shouldn't the default be to approve the voting per the statute, which says it has to be on Tuesday?
Well, you just analyzed the case a lot better than she did. No, you're exactly right, and that's obviously also what Alito says in his dissent, which was very well written. I've been watching Alito for a long time, and I will tell you, and I'm sure you know this, he's probably the best justice on the court when it comes to knowing the most about elections. And our historical practice of elections. He's really good at this. He's the one that wrote the Louisiana versus Calais redistricting decision. It was released also just a little while ago. And I got to tell you, the other thing that struck me about this case was how much more he knows and understands about our election system and its history than Amy Coney Barrett does.
Oh, there's no question about it. And I got to tell you, from my perspective, Alito is the new Scalia. I mean, Scalia, to me,
yes,
Scalia should be on Mount Rushmore. All right. And since that's never going to happen, Alito right now is coming in like Scalia light. Is that a fair analysis?
It is, although I would put, if I had a choice, I'd put both Alito and Thomas up there.
Okay. Well, I know, but Thomas doesn't write a lot of opinions, and Alito does, and so I really get to we really get to enjoy and to learn from Alito more than Thomas, just because Thomas doesn't write as much. But yes, in terms of how they vote, they're right there equally strong. So here, let me ask you this in the minute or two that we have left as a last question, Hans. What are the practical election integrity consequences of letting states count the ballots that arrive after Election Day? And I'll give you a hint. Part of it makes me want to talk about Los Angeles and the mayoral race. But what are the practical implications of this decision?
Look, when ballots have to be in on Election Day, there's no way of fudging that. But instead, you get the kind of system that California has. Remember, she says in this opinion, as long as it's postmarked by Election Day. Well, California has a rule like that, except they don't pay attention to it. In California, if the postmark is blurry or can't be read, they go by whatever date the voter put inside the envelope, which means that campaign operatives and others, when they're going to people's houses and collecting their ballots after Election Day, they ought to be sure that the envelopes either don't have a postmark on them or are smudged, so that they can pick up ballots that have been voted after Election Day. That's a big issue. The final thing on this is, this was a statutory interpretation. Barrett did say if Congress wants to change the law, they can. This makes passage of the SAVE Act even more important.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
It has a provision that says absentee ballots have to be in by the end of Election Day.
Yes, I am a big cheerleader for the SAVE Act, and that's a whole nother segment, Hans, and your time is valuable, so we'll save that for another day. But Hans von Spakovsky, you are with Advancing American Freedom. I love this organization. I love that Mike Pence went out and started this. If folks want to follow you online or in social media, how can they do that?
I'm at H. von Spakovsky, or they can go to the website of advancingamericanfreedom.com.
Fantastic, sir. Great to talk to you as always, and I look forward to our next talk.
Me too. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, my friend. Hey.